Welcome, church family, to this wonderfully warm Sabbath. Let's sing our opening hymn for our church, Sabbath school service today. He leadeth me. Thank you very much for bringing us all here today. Thank you for helping us to make it safely through another week. Be with us today as we listen to our speakers, and may you speak through them. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Good morning. Can you hear me? All right.
Can you hear me?
Okay. We're good. We're less a technician this morning, so we're going to see how we can do. Well, Joseph. We're starting the story of Joseph now in Genesis. Interesting, the Jacob story following up to this. And interestingly enough, as it says, what does Joseph's name mean? Do you remember? Joseph's name. Can you give it to us in the Hebrew?
Well, I don't think I can pronounce it very well, but it means dreamer. He was nicknamed Dreamer.
He was nicknamed Dreamer. They say that they can't quite hear us, so if you could go ahead and give us a little bit more gain.
You can't hear me?
Yeah. Well, you got it tipped upside down here, girl.
Can you hear me now? No. Maybe I'll hold it.
That'd be fine.
Can you hear me now?
Testing 1 2. Testing
Okay,
1 2.
well, I may have to hold it.
Can you do number 1 just a little bit more too? Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Is that better? Can you hear me? Okay.
All right. He was nicknamed Dreamer because that was a very good name for him.
Yeah. Interesting how that turned out. But you know what? Joseph, it's interesting to me that Joseph covers more territory in the book of Genesis than any other character. More than Abraham, even. So it's a very important story, I think, for us to understand. There's so many things that we can get into, but we need to get started into that. You know what? The Sunday's lesson begins with family troubles. Nobody has had any family troubles I know here, so we would like to just explain to you. Colleen is going to give us a little setup of the family dynamics there, the sons of Jacob. Why don't you do that for us?
Well, when there are family troubles, I always want to ask the question, why?
Why?
There's
And what
usually
set it
a
up?
setup. Well, we're all set up. We're born into a sinful world. But there were specific things going on in Jacob's family that set things up for family troubles. And the lesson brings out that polygamy definitely reduced the love quotient, the love factor in the family, because there was this striving and competition. So, of course, after Jacob had married Leah and then Rachel.
Of course, that was not his first choice.
No, he wanted one wife, Rachel. At least that's what we believe.
Yes.
Sure. Where's our... Everyone has family
I
troubles.
think I said that with a chuckle. Yes. And,
we usually have a roving mic.
yeah, I know. I don't know where she is either.
It seems
Let me get you one here, Donna,
missing
if you
today.
don't mind. Testing 1 2. Great, thank you. I don't know where our
So Donna will help
regular
us out.
person
Thank you, Donna. Thank you so
Okay.
much. But anyway, so Leah was not the loved wife. Obviously, we all know that. And so God saw fit to let her bear children first. And she bore 4 sons before anybody else had any children. The first one was Reuben. And she said, "The Lord has looked on my affliction. Now, therefore, my husband will love me."
So this is the first son that basically attributed to Jacob.
Right, Reuben.
So with Leah had the son number 1 named Reuben.
And then her second son she had after that, his name was Simeon. She says, "Because the Lord has heard that I'm unloved, he has therefore given me this son also." So she named him Simeon.
Did you hear that? Why? What was her comment about having a second child?
Because she was unloved.
She felt unloved.
Right.
So maybe she will be loved because she has born now a second child. Amazing. Of course, yeah, go ahead.
And then she bore a third child. His name was Levi. And she said, "Now this time my husband will become attached to me because I've borne him 3 sons."
Yeah, how
you
many
can
sons does
see
it
the
take?
build-up here.
How many sons does it take?
Then her 4th son was Judah. "Now I will praise the Lord." And then she quit having children. By this time, Rachel was very, frustrated, and she wanted sons too.
I wonder, do we have any idea whether during the time that Reuben and Simeon were born, would Rachel have been a wife yet? Or was that during the 7 years that she worked?
No, because Jacob married Rachel after 1 week of being married to Leah.
I thought
Then he worked 7 years for Rachel.
Oh, so it wasn't till afterwards.
Yeah. So
Okay.
they were both his wives.
So they
during this
were
time.
both trying to bear children, and Leah was the only one that seemed to be able to do that.
So Rachel decided that she would give her maid to Jacob.
Got a comment back here.
Bilhah. Okay, a comment.
Do you think Leah was part of the deception? I mean,
The
don't
deception
sisters talk?
In what way?
When did she not know? Did she not realize that it was Rachel and did she not tell?
You know, I heard a commentary on this. She went along with it for sure. And there probably was a strong cultural influence so that it seemed okay to do. But it was definitely not right.
I think I hear you're saying, was Leah surprised by being offered, or was she, or did her father come and say, hey, you know what? I know that Rachel was here, but you're daughter number one must be married first. And so you are to go and be his wife. Is that how you understand it?
I wonder if that could have made her felt unloved.
Oh.
I mean,
well, she knew she wasn't chosen.
Yeah.
That she was forced on Jacob. That had to have stuck with her.
When you're voted last to be on a team, it never feels too good.
But based on the comments she makes as these sons are born, it also leads me to think that in some way Jacob was showing favoritism to Rachel during this time.
She was his first choice.
Right.
Leah was, okay, I guess I have to, type of thing.
And so Rachel complained to Jacob and said, give me children or I die. And he said,
okay, so this is now after Leah's
four sons.
Okay, so we have 4 sons so far. Probably a few daughters in there too, but who knows? They're not recorded. Okay.
So she gave her maid Bilhah to Jacob. And Bilhah bore 2 sons.
Well, because she blamed Jacob for not getting her pregnant. And I think, what do you think? Tell me whether you think this sounds right. So the only way that I think that Jacob probably would have consented to impregnate a servant was if Rachel had come and said, hey, you haven't made me pregnant. But I tell you what, I got a plan. Why don't you use my servant, and then you'll give me a child? And, I think Jacob maybe was put into a position where, hey, I'm feeling a little bit like I'm not doing what I should be doing, making you pregnant.
Because Bilhah was a servant, the son was attributed to Rachel.
Yeah.
So Rachel even said at that time, God has judged my case, and he has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore, she called his name Dan.
Okay. So
And then Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore a second son. Then Rachel said, with great wrestlings I've wrestled with my sister, and indeed I've prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali.
So these are the 3 sons of?
Those were 2 sons of Bilhah.
Oh, Dan and?
Naphtali.
And Naphtali, okay.
Right. And then, of course, Leah wasn't bearing children by this time. And when Leah saw she stopped bearing, she took her maid, Zilpah. And she gave this maid to Jacob as well, so that her sons would be attributed to her. And Zilpah bore a son. Let's see, which one is it? Gad and Asher. So then Leah's maid, Zilpah, had 2 sons. So they're going back and forth. I'm sure there's a lot of...
If it works for you, then it's going to work for me too. Let me use my servant, even though... Yeah, it's amazing. We don't understand the dynamics of that culture, but evidently a servant was a servant.
Well, after
Did whatever
this,
the master wanted.
To finish the story, because our lesson really isn't on this story,
Yeah,
but it
that's
helps us understand why there might have been so much struggle amongst Jacob's sons. So after this, Reuben, Leah's oldest son, found some mandrakes in the field, and they were evidently a coveted
Tell them what
vegetable
they
or
are.
fruit.
What is a fruit
mandrakes.
supposed to do?
Evidently, they were supposed to help you be fertile. Okay, so Rachel said, give me some of your son's mandrakes. And Leah said, is it a small matter you've taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes? So still there's this contention in the family. Well, Jacob slept with Leah that night. She became pregnant now after not having borne children for a number of years. And she bore a 5th son. And she said, God has given me wages because I've given my maid to my husband. So she called his name Issachar. Then Leah conceived again and bore a 6th son and said, now God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will dwell with me because I have borne him 6 sons. So she called his name Zebulun. And then that was the end of Leah's sons. And it was after all those 10 sons were born to Leah and the maids that God heard Rachel's prayer, and she became pregnant with Joseph.
So we've got 10 older sons by 4 wives. 3 wives, I'm sorry. And then we have Rachel giving child, making the 4th wife. That's right. That's right. So how would you like that family? That is, you think there might be any jealousy, any I'm better than you are thoughts among the siblings?
Well, Ellen White has an interesting comment. She says, the evils of polygamy tend to dry up the springs of love.
You're popping into it.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm popping. So the jealousy of the several mothers had embittered the family relation. The children had grown up contentious, impatient of control, and the father's life was darkened with anxiety and grief. So he didn't enjoy the infighting, but it was there, inevitably. But you know, I've got a comment over here. I find it amazing God didn't stop working with these people. He was working for them.
In that culture, you needed to have a son or you were nothing. That was part of the problem.
In other words, I think what you're saying is that all of the land inheritance and all of the flocks and all that, they were basically owned by males. And if you weren't attached to a male, then you couldn't own anything, basically. You didn't own anything. Is that a correct statement? Anybody think that's different? Okay. Yeah, that's the way I understand it. So you've got this dynamic set up here. And so the trouble is not on the outside. So in other words, it says the controversy does not concern the possession of land like it did with Abraham and Lot. Okay, and the use of a well, it was mainly a family problem. Yes?
I think maybe property was an issue of those days, but the bigger issue was a woman had to bear children or she was disgraced. In that culture, she had to have, and specifically sons, because that culture valued sons, didn't value daughters so much, even though they were required to have sons, but that stood that way. But the bigger issue was, if you couldn't or didn't, you were disgraced in the society because society demanded every woman who was married have at least one or more sons. And since it didn't happen for so many years, that's why she was concerned how she was appearing in that society and in that culture of the day, because she was under disgrace. Rebecca was under disgrace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's exactly right.
When she finally did have a son, though, what was Jacob's attitude toward Joseph compared to his other sons?
Yeah, we're going to get into that. Okay. I think we should start with the story now. Genesis 37. If you want to follow along, we got one more comment here. Okay.
Here.
Good.
Just real quick here. You know that there was jealousy as human nature. It's bound to be. If you ever had around a family that was divorced and you had siblings that were from another man and they came to live with you, I've been through that experience, and there's jealousy because the one say, well, why'd you leave us? Why did you leave Daddy and leave us with all alone? And so they come to the home where there's a single child. Yeah, there's a lot of jealousy.
Yeah. And is jealousy one of the fruits of the Spirit?
That's a no.
Yeah. We went through them last week a little bit, and I think I saw jealousy on the side of those that are in the flesh. And so, but it is human nature. That's who we are. We are in the flesh. And unless, of course, we become in the Spirit, we will act like the flesh. And jealousy is... It seems we're going to get into this a little bit more because jealousy is just a seed for some many other things. Yes?
Did Joseph have an easier life than his brothers?
Let's put that out there. Did Joseph have an easier life?
At least initially.
than his brothers up until the time, of course, that his brothers did their dastardly deed. Anybody want to go for that?
And or was Joseph different
Okay, down
from his
here.
brothers? How was he different?
I think that Joseph was more pampered to a degree, and yet he always did his father's bidding. You know, we traveled probably 70 to 80 miles to go see his brothers at one time. And yes, I think that he got favors that they didn't, but Mrs. White says that he always did his father's bidding and relied on God and listened to his father's teachings of God.
Yeah.
So I think that he did his share of the work, I believe.
So,
She says he was more obedient to his father's righteous teachings than any of his brothers.
so let me ask you this. So if you are a good child, should you be given privileges that other children don't receive in the family? If you're the easy child, if you're the good child, the one that always does the right thing, should you be given some special priorities? Was that a yes or no?
Now, I'm the youngest of 5. I have 2 older brothers, 2 older sisters. So there's no doubt. I think it's just human nature and the way the family works that the youngest kid gets spoiled or gets pampered or gets the easiest, the most lenient course. And it seems in Joseph's case that was certainly the case as well. And I guess I associate Jacob and Joseph's personalities together. We know that Jacob was a mild man dwelling in tents versus Esau. So I guess I attribute a little bit of that to Joseph as well, relative to his other brothers. They were out, handling the sheep and herding around. We know that he had to follow them many miles or days' journey just to catch up where they were. So they were out, doing some really hard work, and he was more the dweller in tents, so to speak, or the messenger boy. Granted, he was younger than them as well, but
Can we just call it what it is?
Yeah.
Mommy's boy?
yeah, I mean,
Daddy's boy.
Daddy's boy.
Daddy's boy, mommy's boy, whatever. Okay, down here. Yeah, it's interesting. But I think that was very interesting that you brought up, Jacob's nature was not the aggressor. And now we're maybe seeing that in Joseph as well.
I thought I read in the lesson this week, Joseph had his own flock. He was out working
his
with
own
the
flock.
animals. He had his own flock. He was doing work. And to have the position later that he had and to be so faithful to Potiphar in his house and work hard in that house, he had already worked hard at home. I think he did. He just reacted differently to everything.
Yeah,
He had his own flock. That's hard work.
He reacted differently. We touched on it earlier. It says here he loved to obey God, and he hated sin enough that it hurt him to see his brothers pursuing an unrighteous course. It bothered him because he saw them going a different path at times, which is why he, maybe unwisely, told on them to his father.
Let's just read that here in Genesis 37.
Yeah.
Was that?
Oh yeah, I'm sure he worked hard.
Okay, she said she got her. She's
Right.
saying that Joseph had his hands dirty. I think it was probably true because if he knew how to administer Potiphar's house, he had some idea of how things worked. Yeah, comment over here.
I'm really wondering if Joseph had such a good time. Can you imagine waking up by time you're in your teen years, 10 brothers do not like you.
All
They're
older?
going to be at you as quick as they can every day. That's not so nice.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the question, that answers kind of the question that we said, does a child like that is very compliant get special privileges? Well, you may get some special privileges, but your siblings are probably going to give you the other side of that.
We have a comment back
Okay,
here.
right here.
Joseph must have known that it made his brothers jealous to tell about his wonderful dreams, but he just kept it up.
Yes, I know. We're going to get into that. Let's just comment the story. You want to do this for us? Go ahead. I was going to start the... Okay, let's look at it. And Genesis 37 here, and then we'll pull some more things out of it. So Jacob lived in Canaan as a stranger, but as his father and grandfather had. This is the story of the family of Jacob. I'm sorry, did I say? Yeah, Jacob. One day Joseph, one of the sons of Jacob, who was about 17 years old, okay, so we got the idea here, was out in the field watching flocks. There you go, out in the field watching flocks over the herd with some of his brothers, the sons of, say this for me,
Bilhah and Zilpah.
And Zilpah. I'm not a good name
with
person
those
here.
brothers.
Yeah, when he came home, he told his father some of the evil things that his brothers had been doing. Who loves a snitch? You know what? Your brothers, you know what? Your sons, Jacob, you know what they were doing?
Why do you think Joseph did that?
Why would he be a snitch?
Why
To get
would he tell
even.
his
Why do you think-
father?
To get even, maybe, huh?
Oh,
Maybe.
okay. She says, because I've been what's the word I'm looking for? You know, not beat up, but I've been criticized and ridiculed by my brothers. I'm going to tell on them because
And-
they're not doing something right.
He might have also thought maybe his father would help them behave better.
Yeah.
You know, get dad, who has more authority, to talk to the brothers.
And Colleen, you had mentioned before, Joseph's heart. What was his heart like?
Well, he had listened carefully to his dad's instructions. He was trying to follow them the best he could, and he grew to love God, and he tried to do what was right. And his brothers were not necessarily following the same course.
I think it said in some of the comments here that it grieved him to see evil.
Yeah.
Does it grieve you to see evil? And this is where Joseph's heart was. I go and visit someplace, and I see the evil, and it just grieves my heart. That's how Joseph was. And that's partly probably why, and it could be a little bit, I'm going to get back at my brothers, but that was his nature. You shouldn't be doing that.
So then he comes along telling him his dreams. I think we need to move
okay,
into
we
that.
need to move on. Let's go quickly here. So Isaiah, which of course he became Jacob, listened to Joseph and believed him. He loved him more than any of other sons because Joseph was very tender-hearted and completely honest. Interesting. And he was the firstborn of Jacob's beloved Rachel. Israel, Jacob, showed his preference for Joseph by having a long robe with sleeves made for it of many colors, usually worn only by dignitaries, which none of the other sons had. So when Joseph's brothers noticed this preferential treatment by their father, they soon hated Joseph and never spoke kindly to him, even though he was their brother. About this time, Joseph had a dream, trouble, which he told his brothers. When they heard what it was, they hated him even more. Why did Joseph share his dream? Okay.
A little bit back on Joseph on a prior comment.
Okay.
Joseph had a heart for God. It's been pointed out. He obeyed his father. He had a concern for his brothers because of how they lived. He was wanting to help them grow to love God too. He had no impact on them. Nothing he could say to them would be helpful whatsoever. They would only turn it against him. The only way he had to try and reach his brothers was through his father.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He had to go,
good
he
point.
had no mother there. He had to reach it through his father, and he hoped by telling his father the things were going on, his father could help them. That's a little bit like being a missionary.
Yeah.
When you see something
Very
going
true.
wrong, you try to help people to not do it that way and to improve. I really think that was his motive as opposed to getting back on his brothers for how they had treated him. He may not have liked how he was treated, obviously, being so much younger than them. That's not pleasant. But I doubt very much that was his motive. I think his motive was trying to help them to grow in the right way.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. We have a comment down here. She's bringing the mic.
This demonstrates to me, I've thought a lot about this incident, it shows how lacking in tact he was to his brothers.
Yeah.
And it demonstrates also the power of God to take such a tactless individual and turn him into a diplomat.
Yeah.
Now, my wife
And
wants
you
to
know,
say
you have to
something.
consider his age.
But he was only a lad.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And that's what I was going to say to your comment. He was 17 years old.
Or
and,
less.
And, well, it says 17 in here, but yeah, when he went to Egypt. So he could have been, when he got the dream, he may have been a little less, but yeah. So he was not. You're exactly right. He was a lad. He was just sharing his experiences with everybody. And,
Pointing out people's mistakes doesn't necessarily help them want to change.
Well, if he could turn, if the Lord could turn, if the Lord could turn this man, this tactless individual, into a diplomat, there's hope for you, sister.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Take
Hope
the
for
microphone
Tom,
back,
too.
Donna.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes, yes, I agree. And we were saying that that Joseph was going through life's experiences that were going to teach him a lot of things, because he was not a diplomat yet. Okay.
Sometimes the saints aren't the easiest people to get along with.
You think?
And yeah, it's hard to live with righteous people. And just think about that. You may not agree with it right away, but just think about it for a moment, because it makes whatever other people do stand out in itself. And so Joseph might have been an egoistical and selfish teenager wanting favor with his dad. It doesn't speak right to the motive of Joseph's being able to tell his dad everything. But the fact that he was so tactless as to go to his brothers and tell them this dream that he had, it just makes me feel like he wasn't the easiest and most insightful teenager in the area.
Okay.
And yet, for some reason, God entrusted him with 2 dreams, which I find quite remarkable. He knew the dynamics in the family. He gave Joseph those dreams. They were from
can
God.
you give him back the mic? I wanted to ask him one follow-up question. Do you think that God intended Joseph to share that with his brothers, or was that all Joseph?
Well, it all depends on the way that Joseph did it. Because truth is truth regardless. And this was truth. This actually happened to Joseph, and he had that dream, that prophecy. But to be able to do it in such a way as to be tactful, to be sensitive to what they were feeling, perhaps even to ask them, what do you think this dream means? And to get from his brothers some sort of understanding would have helped.
Okay, so you're saying that maybe the message wasn't the problem, maybe the way in which it was delivered, and a little tactless, and maybe a young lad, that's part of the learning process of how you do stuff. Yes.
Well, the fulfillment of the dream came years later and convinced the brothers of the truthfulness of the dream, and they repented and honored Joseph, because God sometimes plants a seed now, but it doesn't mature and grow until later. That dream that he gave to Joseph, when Joseph told his brothers, it didn't go anywhere with them at the moment, but give them a few years later, and they suddenly realized it was truth, and they changed their attitude totally towards Joseph.
You know, I haven't, I don't remember. Later on, when next week's lesson, when they actually meet, does it say that the brothers remembered the dreams? I can't remember if it does.
I think it does.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Okay, well, let's, so Joseph delivers his dream, and then he does. What kind of response does he
I think
get?
we had a comment
What
here.
kind of response? Okay, let's go here.
Sorry, just one final thought about Joseph and his brothers and the dynamic. I think it's easy for us now in retrospect because we know how the story goes.
Right.
But at that time, it was just all these brothers. They were oldest to youngest, and he was a younger brother who was basically nobody. The oldest brothers, the number one son got...
And then in that culture, the
Yeah.
older the better, or the older
Well,
the...
the oldest one was to get the birthright.
That's right.
And they didn't know how the story was going to play out. At this point, it's like, hey, top dog gets the birthright, and everybody else get in line. And so there was this, but the other thing behind it too was they know the story of Rachel and Leah. They knew the favorite, and Leah was still, I believe, alive at this time, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
So
Yes.
to give Joseph a coat of many colors while Leah is still alive is almost like a insult to her because it just reminds her that the favorite was Rachel.
Yeah.
So, and the brothers were well aware of this dynamic all along, and I'm sure, I mean, it's almost amazing that they were as gracious as they were for as long as they were, but also remember that they did some horrendous things to the surrounding people.
Yeah, that's
so it's just such an interesting dynamic story that God could work with this kind of
That's what I
dynamic.
was going to say. You know, how in the world does God work with us? I mean, we just mess up so much and so many times. And here is Jacob. Was he the ideal father? Would you raise him up as the ideal father? No. You don't show favoritism. I mean, you know, you may have a favorite, but you know, you try to even it out a bit, and so that you don't show that. So Jacob had his problems, no question about it. And to raise a child that is favored so many times doesn't benefit the child, right? Does it benefit the child to be raised as a special child, and you know, among the 10 you are given all kinds of lavish gifts and things? I just can't imagine that would be the way to raise, that would give somebody an advantage.
You have to have resentment for it because
Yeah.
being tricked and all that.
Yeah. Jacob, you're talking about Jacob.
He
Jacob
says he had to have,
resentment.
Jacob must have resented his uncle for putting him in this awkward position.
Yeah.
Probably there was that there too.
Anyway, we
But
know.
the end of this day's lesson talks about the principle we should all live by, which is that of being a servant, serving others, looking out for the interests of others. And in the Ellen White notes, there's a great statement. It says, nothing is so offensive as to hunger and thirst after the praise of men. No human being is to seat himself on the highest seat, accepting the praise of others and forgetting his treasures belong to God. I don't know how to apply that to exactly what's going on with Joseph because we don't know everything. But it could have appeared he was lifting himself up, regardless of how he told the story of the dreams. The dreams were the dreams.
That's right. She's referencing Matthew 20 here, 20, 26, and 27. I'd just like to read it out of this real quickly here. So this is what Joseph became and wasn't at the time. Okay, my kingdom is different, Jesus talking here, and your standards should be different. Heaven measures success by what a man does for others, not by what they do for him. Verse 27. If you want to be important, interesting, then you should be the one most willing to serve. Is that a standard for a good place to live? That's Jesus' standard right here. Comment right there.
You asked the question, how does God deal with us? I'll tell you how he deals with us, with great mercy.
Yeah.
And he said, blessed are the merciful, for they shall have mercy. So we should deal with others the same way, mercy.
Right, and he keeps pointing us to his own character as revealed in Jesus. And that is how we are changed.
Well, we better move on here. Let's look at what happened to Joseph now down the road here. We're looking at Genesis 37, verse 12 here. And soon afterwards, Joseph's brothers went to inspect their father's herds grazing near Shechem. Time had passed, but there was no report. In other words, evidently they didn't get a text or an email from them as how things were going. So Israel, or Jacob, said to Joseph, "Come, I want you to go to Shechem to find your brothers and bring me a report for what's going on." Joseph said, "Certainly, Father, I'll be happy to go." And Israel said, or Jacob said, "I'm concerned about your brother's safety up there, as well as about our herds, because of what Simeon and Levi did to the Shechemites." You remember that, right? Kind of wiped them out. "I'm sure the people there have not forgotten that. Go and find out how things are going and come back as quickly as you can." So Joseph left Hebron early the next morning, and after a few days finally reached Shechem, and then looking for his brothers. They finally found his brothers, and of course you know the story. They saw him in the distance, and they said, "Hey, we're looking, look who's coming, the what? The dreamer." And they agreed amongst them, before he got there evidently, that they were going to kill him as he came into the camp. So they said, "The dreamer is coming to spy on us." I love that word in this translation. Here comes that dreamer to spy on us again. Oh, my goodness. Then he'll go and tell Father how bad we've been. So let's kill him and throw his body into one of these dried up wells, and we'll say that a wild animal killed him. But Reuben overheard. Who is Reuben? The oldest, that's right. Reuben overheard their plans and decided to save Joseph. He said to them, "Let's not kill him. He's our brother." Then he suggested another plan, saying, "Instead of killing him and becoming murderers, let's just throw him in one of these empty wells. There are a number of them around this area." He made this suggestion because he intended to rescue Joseph and send him back to his father before anything else could happen to him. As Joseph neared the camp, they waved at him. But when they got there, instead of hugging him, they grabbed him and ripped off his robe, dragged him over to a nearby dry well, and dropped him in. Brothers.
I wonder if they ever imagined they would do something like that. I'm not sure that.
What led them to that point?
Yeah, what was driving? We know that they hated him. But how did it get to that point where they were willing to almost murder him?
Virtually. Yep.
Is that kind of scary? If you harbor attitudes in your heart, you might do something you really didn't intend to do?
You know, that kind of jealousy will blind anybody, and especially someone who's not a godly person. They're not even going to think about it. And I'll bring this a little closer home. I had two stepbrothers that I was 8 years old when they come to live with us. They were 8 and 5 years older than me. And one day I came home from school, and my one brother was pretty bad. He was in the bedroom with my folks' bedroom with a friend, going through the drawers. And me being the younger kid, what did I do? I started screaming like, "What are you guys doing? And Mom and Dad, they're going to be so upset with you." And they grabbed me and threw me up against the wall, said, "If you say anything, we're going to beat you up so bad." Anyway, so it's similar to this story. And he ended up in reformatory school. The other one wasn't much better. They were just a lot of hate, a lot of jealousy, and it just got to them. It just ruined their lives.
And look at how you turned out. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So, but I like the word you used there. Jealousy blinds us. That's an interesting word, because when you let that fester and grow and nourish it and continue to feed it, it will absolutely blind you from what's right.
Here.
I was reading in Desire of Ages, just some of the thoughts. The thought that this reminds me of that I went over just in the last week or so is the power of our thoughts, that we allow ourselves to think, what we indulge in our thinking, and then the power if we speak that verbally to somebody else, once we speak it to somebody else, our words now, our honor depends on kind of being true to what we say. We know this when we say that to somebody else. So now we're kind of obligated to abide by what we say. So then the words have power over us. We have to kind of maintain what we've said, because we don't want to look silly for, going back on what we've said. So we have to be very careful what we say, because it in turn is going to have a power over us. And if we say something that's, impulsive and unreasonable, now we're going to have to be obligated perhaps to behave that way, to not go back on our word. And so I imagine between the brothers, they're out there talking amongst themselves, all this outrage and the things that they may have said and the ratcheting effect that would have amongst themselves to let that anger and that jealousy just go to a really dark place, especially if there was no brake put on it by any one of them.
And let me ask you, you had a comment? Oh, we got a comment up here. Which is worse, to be thrown into a pit and starved to death, or to be sold and worked as a slave for your whole life? And you weren't there ready to answer that, I know. Go ahead, your comment, and then think about that.
I was just thinking in response to what Colleen had, of a question she'd asked, it makes me think of 1 Corinthians 10:11 about how these things were written for our example, because I think we could be very much prone. Of course the details are not the same, but we're not any different.
We're all carnal natures.
Right.
You can see the dynamic in the world today. It almost seems to be escalating out of control.
These things are written for our example.
Yes,
because we very easily, like Colleen was asking, we can find ourselves in very having the same kind of character and the same kind of, it's like how could you come to murdering your brother?
You know what? This isn't a cleaned up book. This is what really happened. And it's interesting how God says, okay, here's how it happened and didn't turn out well. Here's one that turned out well. Can you see the difference?
And we got a comment over here.
Constantly showing us back and forth. Yeah.
I'd never really thought of this before, but when you said Joseph was coming from a distance to his brothers, what was he wearing? The favored coat. Why would you go what is he thinking? He's really going to rub that in to his brothers.
Not very wise.
They rip it off.
Yeah.
I like to think that somehow God had a way of helping Joseph's brothers have tools, and Joseph, deal with their character flaws. And he did eventually take them on a journey that demonstrates that they had changed, but it was many years later when they went to Egypt. But God has given us tools, and one of those tools is prayer. And anything we ask for, we receive. Anything at all. So if we recognize attitudes or things rising in ourselves, if we ask, he can deliver. And we have a comment over here.
I think there's another element to be considered here with this mob violence, because remember, Joseph was outnumbered, to say the least. And it appears to me that they so disrespected their father. Again, the favoritism comes in. That whole thing, we've seen that time and time again with these Bible families all through this quarter. Playing favorites brings consequences. And the other sons, the brothers, so disrespected their father that they never once seemed to consider how this would affect him.
Yeah.
It's surprising to me that Reuben, the firstborn, was the only one that seemed to be thinking about something like that. He wanted to rescue Joseph. And he wasn't there when they sold him as a slave, because when he came back and looked in the pit, he's like, where is he? And he was planning to help him. That was amazing to me.
Yeah. I like the comment in here where, it says they grabbed him, and then of course the caravan came along and says, hey, if we just leave him there, we got nothing. Why don't we sell him, and at least we'll get something? So how much did he get? Do you remember how much did they get from the Ishmaelites for Joseph? 20 pieces of silver. How much was Christ 30, wasn't it? 30, so not quite. But
Inflation.
Inflation, yeah. But yeah, 20 pieces of silver. So hey, they're up. They're up 20 pieces of silver, other than just letting him be there. And I like the comment that it says in this version. It says, so now let's see what comes of his dreams. So still on their mind. The brothers are still saying, we know, we remember those dreams. We remember those. Let's see. Now so much for those dreams.
I think one of the points of the lesson is how God takes these tragedies and brings something good out of it. And God knew all along where he was going to take Joseph and what he was going to accomplish. And nobody else did. But imagine how Joseph must have felt at this point, and that kind of takes us to Wednesday's lesson.
Yes, but quickly, I want to just ask the question. Was it God's plan for Joseph to be sold into slavery and go to Egypt?
Yes.
Okay, somebody venture out there. Okay, right here. Was it God's plan, or was it God's third, fourth, fifth, sixth plan?
I don't know which plan it was, but Joseph definitely tells his brothers that you intended this for evil, but God intended it for good. So God's hand is in it.
So now you're looking at down the road a ways to see how that might have happened.
But the Lord always turns around things for his, whether it's
that's what I'm trying to understand. You know, I wonder what the plan would have been if his brothers would have acted like Christians. How in the world would Joseph get into the position that he was in? Was there a plan A?
Well, it was never God's plan for sin to enter this world.
Okay.
Things don't always go according to God's plan. He allows events to develop based upon human beings' actions. Everything that humans do is not God's plan. It's not his will, but he uses it. He allows it to work out his plan. That was true in Joseph's case. I don't think he intended for him to be killed, didn't intend for him to be in slavery, but he used that as the ultimate end to take care of freeing Israel and taking them out of Egypt eventually. So we can't always say what God's plan is. I don't want to guess God's plan. I don't want to judge God's plan because we don't know. He will use events to achieve his end.
And I think that's what we're trying to say here, is that while we may not always follow God's plan, as long as you follow God, he'll turn that circumstances around.
He needed to learn a lot of lessons before. He needed some education, and education is hard, and so are learning lessons. They're hard, and sometimes we have to suffer in order to get them.
But these comments caused me to think, you know, the reason God was able to move in that direction with that plan was because of Joseph's response. It was because of what he had chosen. And even when he went to Egypt and at first was filled with terror and, you know.
But what does it say?
He decided to trust God because he believed in God. And then God was able to use him.
You had read something that you know what? Once he found himself in this horrible situation, what did he determine to do? I am going to follow my God. That's it. I don't know where we're going. I don't know how it's going to turn out. But I'm going to follow God. And as he was looking back on his homeland while he's tied in chains behind the wagon, looking back at his homeland and saying, God, I believe in you, but I don't believe what's happening. And it's just an amazing thing. He had to be, back to Betty's comment, I think now starts Character Building 101.
It's such an interesting dynamic, this idea of God creating a universe with free choice. And the only way you think he would have ventured to do that is knowing that he would never deviate from true love. because almost imagine them having this conversation before anything was created. All right, how are we going to run this thing? It's going to be based on true love. Are we committed to that, even if this happens, or this happens, or this happens? Because if we allow free choice, anything can happen.
Between Joseph and God?
No, we're talking about the Godhead, before they even created this world. And they had to commit that this was how they were going to run things, and this is who we are. This is how we respond in every situation, no matter what. We're committed to it 100%, and the son said, okay, I'll be the one to go and especially do, whatever has to happen.
To become human.
Yes, become human. And so we can trust that God's response will always be from that position.
Yeah, just interesting, because when Jesus volunteered to come down here, to become human, is he still human today? Does he have the restraints of humanity? It's an irrelevant question, my wife tells me. But it's interesting. But my understanding is he still has some limitations of being a human. Even though he has been brought back to heaven, I think he'll have the limitations.
I doubt that Joseph, we know that Joseph had no idea where he was headed.
Right.
All he knew was, and it says here in Patriarchs and Prophets, after he remembered the lessons of his youth, while he was on his way to Egypt, and he then and there gave himself fully to the Lord and prayed that the keeper of Israel would be with him in the land of his exile. He was going to trust him all the way. Then it says, his soul thrilled with the high resolve to prove himself true to God. And he determined, under all circumstances, to act as became a subject of the King of Heaven.
Wow.
I'd like to comment on a remark you made a few minutes ago. Jesus said, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. He didn't want to do it.
Right.
And yet
that was his human nature.
Yes. And any strength he had, he didn't get it from his divine being. He got it from his Father. And that's the same with us. We have nothing inherently good in us, but any strength we get and any talent we have, we get from divinity. And so he didn't want to do it. If possible, let this cup pass, but he did it anyway.
That's right.
And that's an example to us too.
Yeah, Jesus humbled himself even to death on a cross. And my question is, was Joseph sufficiently humbled after all his years of serving as a slave and then in the dungeon? And was he sufficiently humbled?
And did he need to be humbled?
Right, well, that's where I think we can see in the story how God amazingly does for us what we need when we don't even know our need, because Joseph was obviously in a situation, working, when your supervisor is the chief executioner, you better do a good job, and you better do your best.
A little incentivized.
Right, you kind of don't have any other options. And, I think his experience in working in Potiphar's house and being a slave in prison, it kind of motivates you what your options are. And I think God in his love and wisdom did what Joseph needed best.
Yeah, and Ellen White also says, regarding his time in prison, that it prepared him to be a wise and sympathetic ruler, because he saw the tyranny, he also saw the crime, he saw so much of the bad. He had empathy for people.
Who makes the better leader? Somebody that's worked themselves up, up in the, working in a grocery store, and then working as this and working as that and working as that, and then become president of the United States? Or the guy that's just been privileged all the way along?
A comment in the back.
Okay.
You were asking if he needed to be humbled, but it also says in Patriarchs and Prophets that it was Joseph's humbleness, it was his gentleness and his faith that shone through to Potiphar at the very beginning. So he was already gentle and faithful and those characteristics were already shining through, and his upbringing is what, you know, helped direct him in the path that he needed to be there while he was there.
Yeah, that's a good comment, because I wondered if Joseph needed to be shaken down a little bit, needed to be dropped down a few notches. If he lived as the favored, now what kind of attitudes does that put in your head? And does that need to be adjusted? But it's amazing to see that he went from here to down there and still said, I'll follow my God.
He had
And
lots
so-
of practice at living a life of humility, whether he needed it or not, more humility. Moses had to spend, when I say had to, God saw fit to let Moses spend, 40 years in the wilderness herding sheep after having grown up in the palace. So God is able to use us when we are totally done with self.
Yeah.
You know, Kurt, you asked the question earlier, did God have this plan for Joseph? And you know, Joseph was getting the dreams. So somehow there was some orchestra going on, because he needed to be humbled. And at the same time, you know, he was telling his brothers and even
Brothers,
father.
that all your sheaves, they bowed down to me, and mine was standing up straight.
So I'm sure he was very proud of that, but at the same time, he had no idea what was coming, you know, which helped him to humble.
And you know, that begs the question, do you think the dreams ever played a part in, while he was in the dungeon, while he was being sold as a slave, do you think those dreams kept alive? Do you think that they helped him through those times?
I think they build character.
Yeah, that's right. We have a comment here. Do you want to say something?
Okay, one more and then we'll have to close. Here comes the mic.
God had such a beautiful plan for Joseph. He knew his heart would serve him. But there was not enough room in his heart when he was still filled with pride. So humbling him made him the true servant of God that he needed to be, so that the emphasis was not put on him, but on the God he served.
Well, you know, and it's a little like growing up. We start out, and as she commented back here, Joseph was humble as much as he could be at that point in his life, but God knew there was more. And this closing statement here in the Ellen White notes, in the Christian experience, the Lord permits trials of various kinds to call men and women to a higher order of living and to a more sanctified service. Without these trials, there would be a continual falling away from the likeness of Christ, and men would become imbued with a spirit of fanciful human philosophy, which would lead them to unite with Satan's followers. So we should rejoice in our trials. God is doing something. He's doing something great. And we can trust him, even when we can't
give
see.
Thanks. In everything, give thanks.
Yes, in everything, give thanks.
And that's hard.
Yes, amen.
There are many times when I don't feel like thanking God for a particular situation. But you've got to,
But we know God is
staying
good.
connected. We just have to say that, you know, Joseph then, of course, went to be a slave in Egypt, and, you know, had a run-in with Potiphar's wife. And I love what it says, how can I do this thing against my God? It wasn't like I'm supposed to, or I have to, how can I do this against God? And then Pharaoh has a dream. He goes to prison. Pharaoh has a dream. I'm setting you up for next week because I feel bad that we're not continuing the story here. So, of course, the dream of Pharaoh, he gets called out. He begs the butler and to remember who he was, and the butler came through. So next week, it's about what happens to Joseph after he is now crowned vice president of Egypt. The only one above him was Pharaoh himself. So, Colleen, would you offer a prayer for us as we close?
Okay. Loving Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for this story that teaches us so many lessons. that we can have courage and strength in our lives today as we face various trials. We know that you're good, and we know that all things work together for good because you are all powerful. Be with us the rest of this morning as we worship you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Let me go up here. Again, I am playing double duty here. Our special feature this morning, how many of you know what event has been going on this week for the church? Okay, let me remind you, this is General Conference Week. So they have been meeting in St. Louis, and there was a new nomination of the world leader. And if you want to go ahead and start that video, I wanted to give you just a few minutes of this interview with our new president, Ted Wilson. The audio, there we go.
Elder Wilson, first of all, congratulations. It has been a long day, I'm sure. You'll forgive a historian for noting this, but it's been almost 50 years since the Adventist Church has invited a leader to a third term. What does that feel like for you in terms of the opportunity to help make an impact over time?
Well, it's certainly a humbling experience. It does not embolden me necessarily in any way. I do recognize that we need to maintain as much focus on what God has assigned His remnant church to do, and that is the proclamation of the three angels' messages, showing Christ in all of His beauty and His righteousness, and turning people back to the true worship of God through the Holy Spirit's power. And that has to be redoubled in our efforts rather than slack off. So I hope to focus even more greatly on helping our church members realize their responsibility, and also to help church leaders, local as well as through the ranks of administration, to recognize that we are coming to the end, and things need to be so focused on what God intends for this church to do, because He has called it for a special purpose. So I'm reanimated, rejuvenated in that sense, and hope to focus heavily on helping people truly understand that's our role. And we can't shirk that responsibility. We have to focus on it with every power we have.
Is there anything specifically that you say you had in your back of your mind, and you say, well, we haven't tackled this, we haven't addressed this because of, lack of time, lack of resources, and say, well, now is the time. Now maybe we can do it. Is there anything?
Many of the things that we're doing right now and emphasizing, we're going to be redoubling on. Revival and Reformation should never go away. It's what we need every day. Comprehensive health ministry, we now are focusing on Comprehensive Health Ministry 2.0, which is going to involve a re-emphasis on the right arm of the gospel, the kind of work Jesus did. Luke chapter 4, the emphasis that Christ gives in Matthew 25 when He talks to those who have helped Him when He was without clothes, when He was thirsty, when He was in prison, etc. These things are a natural outgrowth of our relationship with the Lord. It's not the social gospel. It's actually doing the gospel in a practical manner. So these kinds of things we're going to be emphasizing in an even greater way in connection to the three angels' messages, because we're told in the spirit of prophecy that the third angel's message is vitally connected to medical missionary work or comprehensive health ministry. And the third angel's message is a message. And so the medical missionary work is not the message, but it is the right arm. So we're going to emphasize that mission to the cities that we've been doing. I mean, we haven't run out of cities to work in. And I'll tell you, that's one of the greatest challenges I think we face in putting together the spirit of prophecy model for working the cities. And we still have a lot of work to do, but I don't think we have much time because then the Lord's coming very soon. And I think one, of course, total member involvement, our strategic plans, which continue now through the rest of this quinquennium, because it began in 2020, 2025, reach the world, I will go. And I will go has just caught on so magnificently. It was coined by young people in South America, in Argentina, at our university there, and it's just caught on all over the world because it's so personal and it's so focused on mission.
Even the cyclists.
Even the cyclists.
Okay,
I will
let's
go
go ahead and stop that. We don't have time to listen to the whole thing, but I wanted to give you just a little idea of what our new president is thinking, and I will tell you that I have another little video I'd like to show you of Jan Paulsen, who was the former president there, and you might recognize my daughter is the one interviewing Jan Paulsen here. So let's just play a little bit of this one.
Hey, it's Denise Angie with the Adventist Review. What is your name and where are you from?
My name is Jan Paulsen, and where am I? Well, Norway, I suppose, but I haven't lived in Norway since 1961.
Okay.
We went to Africa then, and our international journey has gone on since then, yeah.
Here at GC, what has hit you so far?
Nothing extraordinary is happening at the moment. We are getting reports about activities here and there. I miss an initiative which is specifically directed to young people. You know, sometimes I go to churches, large churches, I look around and I say, where are the young ones? I don't mean children, where are the young professionals? The 20 to 30-year-old finished university, they are the ones who should be running our local churches. Where are they? If we are serious about transferring our ownership to them, let them run the local church. Let them carry the ansvar. Let's trust them. We've done it for many, many years. It's time that the younger ones may have an ownership responsibility. Only then will they give their best, if they are owners of the local church. And we should remember, our church is really a very local thing.
Yes, it is.
It's not a big organization. It's where people come together at a local place for fellowship and worship. That is where I feel the youth, they're very young, those who are young professionals, and the whole thing of the family, they should be engaged, they need to be engaged. It's not going to happen if we don't trust the younger generation and hand it over to them. I made one suggestion once to one church in North America, a large church. The suggestion was that they should require, that all elected officers in that local church for a 2-year period should be under 30 years of age. Wow. See how it would go. You try it. There's an enormous amount of creative energy in the minds of the young. Release it for the sake of God. God wants to. Christ only had young people as his disciples.
Yeah, that's true.
Why don't we try the same?
I think some of them were even in their upper teens.
Yeah. So I feel that we have, we've not succeeded. When I was president, I used to have these conversations with our Let's Talk conversations.
Oh yes, before we go forward, former GC president for how many years?
I was GC president for 12 years.
And how many GCs have you been coming to?
I did between 20 and 30, Let's Talk, all the way around the world, from China to Africa, South America, Europe. And it was my sort of limited effort to try to say to the young people in our church, talk to us. We want to know what you feel, what you want the church to be for you. Tell us, talk to us. Please don't go away. Please don't go away.
Oh, you need to say that to the camera. Please
Yeah.
don't go away.
Oh, please don't go away from the church. The church needs you. Christ needs you. Give him a chance with you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Okay.
More at Adventist Review.
Thank you. That gives you a little idea. We were kind of surprised when our daughter says, yeah, well, I'm going to be at the GC interviewing people. And we're like, what? She's been running their radio station there at Southwestern Adventist University. So I guess they tapped her for some help, and so we're very happy and excited to have that. So young people, we need you, and we want you. Let's break for the worship service.